Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which is the third installment in the MCU Ant-Man series, has achieved a rather dubious distinction within the MCU. It has experienced the largest second weekend box office decline of any MCU film ever. The film opened last weekend earning around $106 million in domestic gross ticket sales. When combined with its international gross box office ticket sales, the film's worldwide opening weekend gross was roughly $226 million, which was less than half of the film's estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is based on a reported production budget of $200 million multiplied by 2.5 to account for the 50% of ticket sales that theaters keep for themselves, and additional costs associated primarily with advertising. For the film's second weekend at the box office, it earned a paltry $32.2 million domestically, which was good enough to keep it in first place at the box office overall, but it was a drop of nearly 70% from the previous weekend's domestic box office earnings. That nearly 70% drop is worse than any of the previous MCU films, but when combined with the international box office, the third Ant-Man film has earned around $364 million worldwide to date, which means that it has earned close to 3/4 of what it needs to break even. Thus, it seems likely that the film should break even within the next 1 or 2 weeks. But what isn't clear is how profitable the film might be for Disney and Marvel Studios. To come up with an estimate, let's determine the percentage of what each MCU film's domestic opening weekend ticket sales were as compared with their respective break-even points. This is simply dividing the first value by the latter. Then let's chart each percentage with the corresponding estimated profit for each film to create a scatter plot, from which a trend line can be calculated showing a linear approximation between the percentage of each film's break-even point earned during opening weekend versus its profitability. Given that there's a lot of variance between the trend line and the actual profitabilities, this won't necessarily be a particularly accurate estimate. But we can see that the 3 MCU films that have flopped to date each earned less than 17% of what they needed to break even during opening weekend. Given that Ant-Man 3's opening weekend was $106 million and its estimated break-even point is $500 million, this means that it earned roughly 21% of what it needs to break even during its opening weekend, which tends to support the likelihood that it will break even. But the trend line on this chart, suggesting that the film might earn well over $100 million in profit, seems unlikely given that its second weekend domestic box office ticket sales plummeted by 70%. To improve the estimate, we can combine the first and second weekend domestic box office ticket sales for each film to see what percentage those are of their respective break-even points, then create a similar scatter plot. As compared with the scatter plot based only on opening weekend data, the points on this chart are converging more with the trend line, and the 3 MCU films that have flopped so far to date have first and second weekend combined domestic gross box office ticket sales that are only 24% of their respective break-even points. But Ant-Man 3 has a percentage that's over 27%, which again maintains the likelihood that it will break even. But the trend line in this plot suggests a profitability that's under $100 million, which I think is closer to what will actually happen in the coming weeks. In other words, Ant-Man 3's box office is trending far more similarly to the MCU Phase 4 films that didn't perform well at the box office overall, as I talked about in my video entitled MCU Falling Profitability, Still Dominates Saturated Superhero Movie Market. In that video, I showed that the average profitability for the 5 least profitable Phase 4 films only averaged around $13 million per film as compared with the 18 heyday MCU films that saw an average profitability of $606 million per film. which includes the final Phase 1 film and all of the Phase 2 and Phase 3 films combined. My own guess is that the third Ant-Man film's final worldwide gross box office earnings might end up around $525 million to $575 million. It could go as high as $600 million if it's lucky, but I'm very doubtful of that at this point. Movie theater goers may just be getting tired of the endless assembly line of MCU films that have been released every year since 2008. They may also be tired of the fact that the high degree of interconnectedness and interdependencies that exist between many of the MCU's films makes watching them increasingly difficult when viewers either don't recall everything that preceded the film that they're watching, or they haven't seen the previous films. And that doesn't take the interdependencies with Marvel shows that have been released on Disney Plus into account, because it's unlikely that everyone who goes to the theater to watch MCU films has also seen the Disney Plus shows. In film series such as Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Star Trek, and even Star Wars, the films are chronologically released and follow one after the other in more or less single progressive narrative arcs. The MCU's films are also mostly chronological, but they tend to focus on specific superheroes or specific groups of superheroes that have their own internal narrative arcs that sometimes cross over and intermingle with other internal MCU story arcs. So instead of having only one progressive narrative story arc, there are multiple crisscrossing narrative story arcs within the MCU. And therein lies the MCU's complexity, which I don't think Kevin Feige or others working for Marvel Studios or Disney have considered adequately in terms of audience interest. Sure, hardcore Marvel fans who well understand all of the interconnectedness and interdependencies probably love it, but the majority of people who aren't hardcore Marvel fans are probably becoming tired of having to try and keep up with the level of complexity that increases with the release of each new MCU film. MCU's film heyday ended with the release of Spider-Man: Far From Home. Only 2 of the MCU's 8 films that have been released since then have been very profitable. The rest, not so much, and 2 of them flopped badly. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania will likely break even, but it won't be a resumption of the MCU's heyday if that's what Disney and Marvel Studios were hoping for. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to see more of our videos in the future and help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.